When you're ready, if you just press the red button, switch yourself on.
Good afternoon. I'm Gordon Ballantyne. I'd like to voice my concerns about safety to the public by building a 20,000 person capacity stadium between two major accident hazard pipelines. I haven't heard much about security issues that this proposal raises. This is a map of the proposed site with the overlapping major accident hazard pipeline consultation distances marked in for both pipelines. Now, I found it a little bit strange that the HSE posed no objection to these proposals on safety grounds. So I mailed the HSE and got these replies from Jerry Adderley. And as you can see here, in blue is marked all the hazards that were considered in setting these consultation zones. And I see no mention of security or terrorism in the hazards considered to set the consultation distances. But it's interesting to note that in red down there, the consultation zones, the distances were established by estimating the risk to a single household. That must be about 10 people versus the 20,000 in this proposal. And just note also that the HSE don't comment on any developments outside the consultation distance, irrespective of the size of development. Neither did I see any mention of security or terrorism hazards in the land use planning methodology. And this is an extract directly lifted from it. And you can see that the development type of DT4 and sensitivity of 4 gives you advise against in the inner zone, advise against in the outer zone, and 25 meters outside that, we have 20,000 people. And I can't for the life of me think of the logic behind that. However, if the HSE assessment factored security into their land use QRA model, there would undoubtedly be a different outcome. Building a stadium near these pipelines changes the dynamics of any risk assessment with security and terrorism factored in. So I can only conclude that the HSE don't do terrorism. I also looked at the responses submitted by BP and Shell, but they just seem to acknowledge that the integrity or the servitude of the pipelines, which I interpret to be, don't dig up our pipelines. I have to ask, did Shell and BP really evaluate the increased security risk to these pipelines imported by this proposed development? Who's taking care of this? I looked through Police Scotland's report, and they don't seem to be. Overall, the duty appears, presumably, to fall to the planners, the council planners, and you councillors. So again, I ask myself, where's the risk assessment? With the over-egg publicity in the media about this proposal, AFC must have moved themselves up the list of potential terrorist targets. Have the council asked themselves what they would do if terrorists targeted this proposed stadium nestling between these two signposted pipelines? A terrorist bomb could damage either or both of the pipelines, which would cause a catastrophe of Grenfell proportions. There's nothing in this planning application to address this real hazard, bearing in mind that the UK current security level is severe. If you think I'm over-dramatising this issue, here's what a gas pipeline on fire looks like. Sorry. Where's your cursor gone? Yeah. This is one in West Virginia, and there's the cursor there.
Dude,
So you can see it's a pretty
Dude, that's
dramatic.
a forest fire. What the fuck?
Oops. Sorry about that.
Dude, people are turning around.
Okay, that's enough of that. But it's pretty impressive, isn't it? Furthermore, I see no plan to protect the AFC supporters from a terrorist vehicle attack, similar to the ones which have already happened in other parts of the country. How will the AFC supporters walking along this A944 to the Kingswells Park and Line ride be protected? And similarly, with the fans walking along the A944 from the Arn Hall off-site parking. Fortunately, there's a solution. There's a protocol in safety called the hierarchy of controls, where the first and most effective action to minimize risk is elimination. In other words, don't do it if there are alternatives, which in this case there appears to be, only inhibited by AFC's fixation on co-located training facilities with the stadium, while many other successful clubs don't have this model. Elimination or rejection of this planning application will lead to a better course of action, namely, for the council and a more flexible Aberdeen Football Club to continue to work together to choose a safer site. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Any questions? Councillor Bell and then Councillor Duncan.
Thank you, Convener. I was intrigued by the film, I have to say. I noticed that BP were actually consulted on whether they thought this that this development would affect the pipeline, and they said no. They were actually asked on a second occasion, and they said no. Now, the pipeline is exposed now, isn't it? I mean, you could go and go and blow it up now. So presumably, their consultation was based on how disrupted the Fortis pipeline and the nearby condensate pipeline could be. And I don't think there was any, there was any feedback that was negative. Perhaps you could comment on that.
Well, it's not immediately apparent when you think about putting a football stadium near these pipelines that one doesn't think of football impacting the integrity of the pipeline. But when you put together a lot of people and hazardous substances, it's the sort of target that people who are attacking our country like to have. So I see that as an additional threat, which I don't really get the warm, fuzzy feeling that's been thought of by everybody. And it looks a little bit like the HSE's got safety and other people take care of terrorism.
Thank you, Convener. Councillor Bell's kind of made my point that at the moment the pipeline is completely unprotected in that area, and it's within a kilometre each way of big housing developments, one side with 7,000 people living on it, the other side with 12,000 people living on it. And I didn't really hear you answer his question, but I have a slightly separate proposition to put to you. The people, the 20,000 people, will be on the stadium, which has been deliberately sited not to stand across the pipeline. It's the training facilities and the training grounds, which will be fenced off on match days. So does that change your perception of the risk of the stadium to the pipeline?
I didn't show you this slide, but the pipeline has signs at the side of the road which shows you where it is. So if you want to commit a terrorist attack, just draw your vehicle up alongside these signs and simples.
Yeah, I think we're all on the same theme here.
I came up here 37 years ago to work at the Shell St Fergus gas plant, and the pipe is about 146 miles going to Mossmoran with condensate. They do have security in place. There's block valves in there, and they fly regularly over the pipelines with helicopters to survey that there's no farmers digging it up, as you indicate. But I mean, the threat is across the length of the inlet facilities on the flag line right down to Mossmoran. You have many gas pipelines. You have the national grid, you have the condensate line, you have the whole lot. So I mean, I really feel that you've kind of, would you not agree with me, focused on an area of a development that, could easily take place on any part of that length of the pipelines throughout Scotland.
I'm aware that there are safety valves in the pipeline, but they're open most of the time and valves fail, don't they?
Convener, without wishing to get too fixated on terrorism, although since it's been raised, I'll ask two questions for me. The first is you made a comment about drawing your vehicle up beside the signs, which you kindly put up a slide of. Presumably you would need a shovel to get to the pipeline as well, without minimising the risk, and it's not as if the pipelines run on the surface. So that's one question. My second question is your comment about the risk to the 20,000 people inside the stadium by a terrorist attack of any sort. Would you accept that whilst Pittodrie obviously does meet all the safety requirements for an operational football stadium, that a new stadium on a site with considerably less buildings around it would be easier to evacuate and safer for those individuals once they were evacuated if there was an attack?
There is no escaping the increased risk posed to these pipelines by putting a large population of people beside it.
Further questions? There's no more, Councillor Yule, so if you do want to.
I ask the questions again, will you give a different answer? Or will you answer the questions? The questions were, would you accept that it's not just a case of drawing up beside the pipeline in a vehicle, you'd need to get down to the pipeline before you could do any damage? And the second question was, would you accept that a modern stadium with lots of open space around about it would be easier to evacuate and faster to evacuate than Pittodrie is?
The fact that the pipeline is buried, if you've looked at some of the footage of the truck bombs in Afghanistan, they make 3-metre deep trenches, and that's roughly where the pipeline is. Which is?
Would you accept that, although obviously Pittodrie does meet all the safety requirements, I'm not suggesting otherwise, that a new stadium on a new site, which is not surrounded by streets and housing, would be easier to evacuate because it's a new design, new build, and also once people were evacuated, they would be safer because they're not constrained by buildings round about?
I don't think that's relevant.
No other questions? Right. Thank you very much for your presentation.